Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and today we are on book 13 of the Marcus Didius Falco series. So, A Body in the Bathhouse is, in its way, it's very much representative of the strange, I suppose you could consider it to be a little bit like the variations in subgenre that happens in this. I mean, it remains historical fiction, and in this particular one, it's absolutely a murder mystery. 3 murders, actually. But what's interesting in this is it starts out as a murder mystery. Falco's father finds a dead body in the hypocaust system. For those who don't know, the hypocausts were how ancient Romans heated their houses, well, those, well off enough to actually have them, and it was effectively central heating. It was sort of an underfloor set of vents, in effect, that you would have a central heating furnace area that would then send hot air out, and it would go out through the hypocaust system to heat everything coming up through the floor from underneath. Romans had a lot of technology. If we had not had a collapse of the Roman Empire and the subsequent Dark Ages that followed, yes, I know, we're not supposed to call them the Dark Ages anymore, but there was a lot of Dark Ages-ness to that. But anyways, if we hadn't, we would probably be significantly more technologically advanced than we were. We would also probably be significantly more overpopulated and significantly, horrifically more polluted than we are right now with the Texas-sized island of plastic in the middle of the ocean, but that's not really the point. The point is, hypocausts, central heating, was a thing in ancient Rome. So, they find the dead body, and following up on it, they find out that yes, this was absolutely a murder by one or more of the contractors that Falco's father had suggested to Helena, the common-law spouse that Falco lives with, that he calls his wife but hasn't technically legally married, that Glaucus and Cotta had clearly were the ones behind the murder, but they had vanished, apparently having taken ship for Britain, it appears. Which is about when the Emperor contacts Falco and says, so, I need you to look into a building project that has gone over budget and off schedule. And all of a sudden, this just becomes a guy looking into a building contract and following up on effectively the politics of what happens on building sites when you have architects with capital I ideas who don't always pay attention to A, what the client actually wants, and B, aren't necessarily paying any attention to practical things like the fact that people have to live in the house. Some of you may remember the Rybczynski book Home that I read many years ago, and he's a architect, or at least was trained as an architect, and one of his big things was discussing taking in architectural studies, that the only time anyone had ever discussed comfort in living spaces was a single lesson in which a person who specialized in, HVAC stuff came in and said, you need to make sure that you create these comfort zones in the house. It's a thing that interior decorators and architects are actually extremely notorious for, and that is making places that are living spaces that nobody can actually live in because human beings don't operate that way. And so you have the head architect who is very much like that. That he's the kind of person who has his vision and isn't really paying attention to things like the guy who wants to make sure that the sewage pipes get put in and that the pipes for the aqueduct that's supposed to be heading sort of right through and into and past that palace that's being built, that those aqueducts are supposed to be, set up, that there are things you need to do, and they need to go in underneath and before you do stuff like tiling, that there are things that have to go in at the same time as you are building the foundation. You cannot put them in after. And he's ignoring that because he's so busy arguing about whether or not to put a tree on the lawn. So you have that, and throughout this book, the bulk of this book just takes this turn into just the interpersonal back and forth of figuring out what's happening on the building site. Glaucus and Cotta kind of fall by the wayside. They are desultorily investigated, but, it's more that Falco makes sure to check in with people if anybody had seen them before, but he doesn't do anything else. He's just investigating that, and that keeps going until finally that head architect is murdered, and all of a sudden we're back in a murder mystery. And this is like halfway through the book. We'd stopped being in a murder mystery, and now we're back in one. And it's like, it's a totally new one. The old one still isn't being discussed or really, investigated, or it just were kind of totally brand new thing. The other thing is that, of course, one of the things that set this aside from traditional, the hard-bitten gumshoe thing is that Falco is a family man, both in terms of, having a wife and now 2 daughters, but also in terms of the fact that he is a brother with a lot of sisters who makes himself available to help the family no matter how much he resents it. And we have the ongoing line in the background of his sister Maya, who has been effectively kidnapped. You see, there had been a thing, and her house had been broken into, and her home had been broken into, rather, and so everybody was extremely concerned because seemed pretty clear that it had been done by a stalker. Anacrates had apparently decided to take up stalking, that he spent several books seeming like a perfectly decent guy, and then, lo and behold, here comes back the same guy who had deliberately arranged to try to get Falco killed on one of his previous out-of-the-country missions. And so she's scared, but just trying to cope with it. And when Falco and Helena are about to leave and cast off and head out into the wild blue yonder of back to Britain, Maya has been invited to check things out on the ship, and the ship casts off while she's still on board. And she is naturally freaking out because she has 4 children who are standing on the shore, and this is the first time Falco has heard about the plan. It's not a plan he approves of, but Helena and his best friend Petronius and quite possibly the children have conspired to send her away. And so she spends the bulk of the book just bitter and resentful and deliberately unhelpful because she's extremely angry that she has been sent to another country, separated from her children, and has no idea if perhaps, for example, Anacrates might decide to make a move on the children while she is absent. And frankly, I suspect it isn't until the end of this when she asks Falco point blank, what he had to do with it, and he tells her that, seriously, I had no idea this was happening. I had no idea this was coming. And she seems to believe him because for the last couple chapters of the book, she seems to have eased back on the, I am absolutely furious with you at all times. At the end of which, Petronius shows up with her children in tow in Britain because they have apparently been trekking all the way across Britain because I don't even know why. It's one of those weird things where, given the interconnectedness of these books and that they really do pick up one after the other, hopefully book 14 will tell us why Petronius would have dragged Maya's kids all the way out to Britain, but we'll have to see. It's weird. It's a weird plan. I honestly don't know if what it is that Helena had been hoping to drop Maya off with her distant family, with her family members who live in Britain in order to get her out of Anacrates' range. Who knows? But yeah, it's a whole thing. Yes, we get a return of a previous character, Perella, who is the dancer woman spy who works for Anacrates, who in this book seems to be starting to get a little bit tired and exasperated of working for somebody who is perhaps not entirely as competent as he likes to appear, and who has clearly used her to do some things that are really functionally not necessary and haven't helped anything. So, you know, it's interesting. Equally interesting, of course, is reading this, and it's the fact that this book, like the best of historical fiction, feels thoroughly modern in places. All of the discussions about contractors cheating on their contracts, about the contractors who show up and stand around and then leave and then make you pay them more to actually do any of the work, but they do a terrible job. It's completely normal. 110% bog standard what you do, how these things work. It's a thoroughly modern idiom, and it's one of those things where it feels sometimes strange to read historical fiction because the past is a foreign country and all that, but at the same time, these are people, and they're people living in extremely large cities with complex social systems, large amounts of, a fair amount of technology, really, if you think about it, extremely complicated government apparatus, and yeah, they act like people in complex large cities with extremely complex government apparatus. And every time Falco complains about the contractors, he feels like somebody who is complaining about contractors that messed something up last week. And that's a quality of the best of historical fiction, is that they feel like real people that you could run into today, because people in history were real people like you could run into today. If you picked up a baby from ancient Rome and raised it like we do now, it's not like they would be any different. There are social mores that are very different, but a lot of it is very much the same. I'm not sure that I have all that much to say. That much else to say. It's been, nearly 14 minutes. So I think I'm going to call it a day. So that's everything, and I will see you all next week.